Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're opening up a stack of sources that explore some really powerful insights from ancient texts. Specifically, we're doing a deep dive into selected psalms presented under the theme of authority, faith, and divine protection. Right, and our source material for this dive, it's a collection of excerpts, some reflections focusing on Psalms 110, 111, 1 or 12, 118 good. And also a key verse, a really potent one from Psalm chapter 91. They get it's a fascinating look at some enduring truths. Absolutely, and our mission really pulling from these sources is to, unpack the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight. Yeah, to take these ancient words and see what they might mean for facing challenges for living well in your life today. Okay, let's jump right in, starting where the sources do, with divine authority. Right, Psalm 110, that kicks us off in this collection. It's noted as a Psalm of David, and that very first verse is quoted. The Lord said unto my Lord, Sit thou at my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool. Wow, that imagery is so striking. The source's reflection on this, it highlights a really core idea, doesn't it? It's not about, striving for authority, no. But revealing an authority that's, already established. Precisely. What the source really emphasizes is that this position, seated at God's right hand, it isn't just status. It signifies victory, rest, and inherent power that's already been attained. So the core nugget then, from Psalm 110, is that divine authority embodied by the Messiah, according to this source, is already seated in victory. Yes. But okay, how does the source suggest we relate to that when we still see enemies, obstacles right in front of us? That's where it gets really interesting. The source points out that even while enemies are present, God is already working, behind the scenes, bringing everything under divine order. Okay. So the call isn't really to fight for this authority right, but more to live from it. And the reflection that takes that call further, it suggests we are to sit and trust, speak with faith, and act from the truth that Christ reigns. It's saying our prayers, our decisions, they can actually reflect that heavenly authority that's already a reality. It's fascinating, isn't it? How that foundational truth, that established authority in Psalm 110, it leads us right into the next section, the sources highlight, building faith. Yes, Psalm 111, with the sources describe this one as more of a celebration. Yes. And it seems like the celebration is deeply tied to memory. It really is. Psalm 111 focuses heavily on God's faithfulness, His actions. The source specifically pulls out verse 4. He hath made His wonderful works to be remembered. The Lord is gracious and full of compassion. So the simple but really powerful takeaway from Psalm 111 according to the source is this. Faith isn't just a feeling. Right? No, it's actively built by remembering God's past actions. Exactly. The source makes it really clear that intentionally recalling God's faithfulness, His mighty acts, His righteousness, it isn't just looking backward. It's fuel for facing today and whatever comes tomorrow. The reflection even suggests something practical, like keeping a personal record of answered prayers' victories. It's saying this isn't just a concept, it's something you can actually do to reinforce faith. And it reminds us that God's works, they aren't just random things happening. According to the source, they're tangible signs of His covenant love. They're dependable, consistent. Remembering them anchors us in that dependability. Okay, so moving from that practice of remembering, our sources pivot to something incredibly practical in Psalm 112. They actually call it a blueprint. A blueprint, yes, a blueprint for a blessed life. And the material highlights verse 6 as key here. Surely, He shall not be moved forever. The righteous shall be an everlasting remembrance. Okay, a blueprint for a life that shall not be moved. That sounds good. What does this blueprint actually look like according to Psalm 112 and the source's reflection? Well, the psalm outlines the characteristics of someone who deeply reveres God. The source points to things like integrity, generosity, specifically mentioning showeth favor and lendeth, and crucially, a deep trust in the Lord. So the key insight here is that this stability, this state of not being shaken, it's presented as a result of living by these principles. Exactly. The source emphasizes that someone living this way won't be easily rattled by fear or uncertainty or even bad news. Why? Because their heart is described as being fixed, trusting in the Lord. Mixed. The blueprint isn't just about external actions, see? It's about the internal posture of trust. And for you, the listener, the source is suggesting that putting this blueprint into action, fearing the Lord, delighting in His commands, giving freely, standing firm in integrity and trust, that's the path laid out for experiencing God's promises fully. Right, and the source even contrasts this with the fate of the wicked described in the psalm. Seeing the stability of the righteous and being grieved, ultimately sort of melting away. It really reinforces the idea that this blueprint provides a foundation that the opposition just lacks. That stability sounds incredibly appealing, especially when life isn't calm, which I suppose brings us naturally to Psalm 118. Sure, the sources describe this one as being filled with declarations of God's mercy, strength, and deliverance. And they say it's particularly relevant for those standing between struggle and breakthrough. This psalm is just packed with powerful statements. They feel like battle cries almost. 2. That the source really zeroes in on are, I shall not die but live and declare the works of the Lord. That's verse 17, powerful. And verse 24, this is the day which the Lord hath made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. Okay, saying I shall not die, but live. Yeah, that isn't just wishful thinking here, is it? Yeah. How does the source interpret that? Well, the source interprets it as claiming God's purpose over your life. Actively speaking defiance to fear or doubt or despair. It's a declaration. Okay, and this is the day which the Lord have made. That's highlighted as a profound perspective shift. It basically means that no matter what the circumstances of this day are, God made it, He is in it, and that fact alone gives you a reason to rejoice and be glad in it. Even in the struggle. Especially in the struggle. The source text is Psalm 118. It's packed with other points supporting this posture, isn't it? It says it's better to trust in the Lord than human power, whether it's just man or even princes, verses 8 and 9. Absolutely, and it speaks so boldly about being surrounded by enemies, but defeating them in the name of the Lord. That's verses 10 to 12. It declares the Lord Himself as strength and salvation in verse 14. And you can't miss that famous verse, the one about the stone which the builders refused has become the headstone of the corner. Verse 22, highlighting God's power to take what's rejected and make it essential. Right, all these points together, according to the source, they paint this picture of victory, not necessarily being the absence of struggle, but the ability to declare God's strength, His purpose, and His enduring mercy, which is repeated all through the psalm. Verses 1, 2, 3, 4, 29, declaring that while you're in the thick of it. Okay, wow, which leads us to our final really potent point from this collection of sources, a specific affirmation from Psalm chapter 91 verse 7. Yes, this verse stands out with just incredibly vivid imagery. 1,000 shall fall at thy side and 10,000 at thy right hand, but it shall not come nigh thee. Wow, I mean, that paints a picture of absolute chaos unfolding all around you. Yeah. It's this startling promise of personal safety in the midst of it all. What does the source say that means? The source presents this as a powerful, active affirmation of divine protection. It's about being covered, shielded by God even when devastation is literally happening right next to you. And the insight there is that this shield, it isn't passive. No, the source describes God's protection as spiritual, yes, but also active and very real. It's basically saying your security isn't fundamentally based on your surroundings changing right, but on your position under God's hand. Position over surrounding. Exactly, and the reflection suggests this isn't just a nice idea, but a practice. It actually encourages saying this verse aloud when fear tries to overwhelm faith. Using it as a tangible anchor, a reminder that according to the source, you are protected, preserved, and held up by that divine hand. We've certainly journeyed through a remarkable landscape in these sources today. From that foundation of divine authority already established in Psalm 110. The practice of remembering God's past works to build faith in Psalm 111. The detailed blueprint for a life of, well, unshakable stability in Psalm 112. Yeah, that blueprint. And those bold declarations of victory and trust spoken right in the middle of struggle from Psalm 118, all culminating in that striking promise of protection amidst surrounding chaos in Psalm chapter 91.7. Thinking about all of this, especially that practical blueprint laid out back in Psalm 1 and 12, fearing the Lord, loving His word, living with integrity, generosity, this raises a compelling question, I think, based purely on what our sources presented. Okay. Is this specific way of living the very key to sort of activating or experiencing that promise of standing firm, of not being moved when you're surrounded by the kind of chaos mentioned in Psalm chapter 91.7 or facing the struggles described in Psalm 118? What might it look like for you listening now to intentionally put maybe just pieces of that blueprint into action today, specifically as a way to stand firm when things feel uncertain?